Hey guys, last time we were talking about stuff, we were talking about the Second Crusade. We talked about how Zangi, the leader of the Seljuk Empire, came up to Edessa and took that over. And after he took over Edessa, he ended up getting killed by one of his slaves. That then puts out a call to Europe for there to be a Second Crusade. So the First Crusade had successfully taken over Jerusalem, and now there was a Second Crusade being called on to take over Edessa. We had two main leaders for the Second Crusade. We had Conrad III of the Holy Roman Empire, and we had Louis VII of France. And they both end up going to the Holy Land in the year 1148. However, the Second Crusade is full of problems. One of the first problems that ends up happening is that Conrad III, the Holy Roman Emperor, he runs into issues. He gets into a battle with the Byzantiums at Constantinople that doesn't go well for him. He loses that battle. He eventually gets over to Turkey, gets in a battle with the Turks at Dolarum, which also doesn't go well. And by the time he gets down to the Crusader states, he only has about 2,000 troops left. So things have gone very poorly for Conrad III on his journey to the Middle East. Things for Louis VII got off to a bit better start. He gets to the battle with the Turks at a place called Meander, and he wins. But then he gets into another battle at a place called Mount Cadmus, and he ends up losing. So by the time you have both Conrad III and Louis VII arriving in the area of the Crusader states, they don't have the troops that they thought they were going to have because of the losses that they had sustained. So they both arrive here in Antioch, and their goal was to arrive at Antioch and then go to Edessa. But when they get to Antioch, they decide they don't have enough troops to push on Edessa. So therefore, they go and they decide to try and take over Damascus instead. Now, last time we talked about how King Fulk had defended Damascus from Zangi from taking over. Fulk had actually come over there and helped out Damascus. But the Second Crusade decides to try to attack Damascus and take it over. So the Crusade, Conrad III, Holy Roman Empire, and Louis VII of France, they both show up at Damascus, and they're sieging the city. And after 4 days of sieging the city of Damascus, the two leaders decide, you know what? Crusading's hard. Let's go home. So after 4 days, they bail and they leave. And that's it for the Second Crusade. Nothing is accomplished whatsoever by this crusade. If anything, it makes things even worse. Let's make a number 3, and we're going to write down 4-day siege of Damascus. So go ahead and make a 3 and write down 4-day siege of Damascus. And then after we have that written down for number 3, we're going to make a number 4, and we're going to write down, nor was anything accomplished by this crusade. And like I said, if anything, this crusade made things even worse in the Holy Land for the crusade. And the reason why it made things even worse was because of the entire fact that Damascus decided that they were now going to work with the Turks instead of the Crusaders. So that meant that they joined up with the Turks a couple years after the Crusaders ended up attacking them. So yeah, more cities joining up with the Turks. All right. So what happens next in the story? So Second Crusade wasn't very successful. Is there another crusade after the second? Yep. And we're going to talk about that one now. So what ends up happening next in the story? What ends up happening next is eventually Zangi is succeeded by his son, Nur al-Din. Nur al-Din ends up, I said, taking over Damascus eventually. And his goal is to eventually to take over all the Crusader states. He wants to kind of knock them out and take them over. He does have some success in which he does defeat the grandson of Bohemond, for example, in a battle, and the grandson of Raymond in a battle. So he does have some success in pushing against them. At the same time, the Crusader states do have some success in taking on Ascalon, which is kind of by Jerusalem. It's like a port city. So they have some success as well in kind of pushing on some other places too. Eventually, Nur al-Din ends up dying. And then there's a bit of debate about who should take over the Seljuk Empire after that. Someone named Saladin or Nur al-Din's son, who's like 11 at the time period. Saladin ends up winning and combining both the Seljuk Turks territory with the Egyptian territory. So Saladin kind of controlled Egypt. He ends up then taking over the Seljuk Turk territory and expanding out the empire by quite a lot. Go ahead and make a new bullet and write down Saladin. So bullet Saladin. So Saladin here, he's going to be the leader of the Seljuk Turks. That's he's going to be in control of both Egypt as well as being in control of the Seljuk Turk territory. So you see all this area here in common brown. That is the territory that Saladin ends up controlling. So all everything here in brown, that's Saladin's territory. So you see it's quite big. And we can see a couple other places also here on the map as well. You can see the Byzantine Empire over here in green. So in green, there is your Byzantine Empire. The blue over here is just, ocean and seas. Okay, so this is Mediterranean Sea right here. Black Sea right there. Atlantic Ocean, right? In blue right here, the biggest empire in Europe at this time period is the Holy Roman Empire. So that's the Holy Roman Empire. You have the Norman Kingdom down here, the Duchy of Apulia down there. Got the Kingdom of France over here. You have the Kingdom of England over here. Okay, so that kind of shows you where the various territories are kind of at on the map. But what ends up happening next in our story? Okay, so eventually, Baldwin the Fourth is king. So you have a guy who's king. He's named Baldwin the Fourth, and he's in charge of the kingdom of Jerusalem. Baldwin the Fourth had leprosy. If you don't know what leprosy is, it's like a bacteria that eats away at your skin. So Baldwin IV has leprosy, and he has two sisters, one named Sibylla, and the other one is named Isabella. What ends up happening is that when Baldwin IV dies, his oldest sister then becomes queen. Okay, so that's Sibylla. She's the oldest sister. Now, she was married to a guy named Guy. His name was Guy of Louisiana, so not a very clever name, but nonetheless. So she's married to a guy named Guy, and Sibylla, what ends up happening with her is that the rich people in the kingdom of Jerusalem, they don't like Guy very much. And they tell Sibylla, hey, we're not going to crown you queen officially unless you get divorced from Guy. And then Sibylla's like, okay, but if I get divorced from Guy, can I then pick whoever my next husband is? And the rich people in Jerusalem were like, yeah, if you get divorced from Guy, you can have whatever husband you want. So she gets a divorce from Guy, and then after she gets a divorce from Guy, then the rich people in Jerusalem are like, all right, Sibylla, who do you want to marry? And she's like, I'm going to marry Guy. So then she ends up marrying Guy, the same guy she got divorced from, and then she crowns Guy king. All right, so that's what ends up happening there. The rich people in Jerusalem aren't very happy about this. The nobles aren't very happy about this. So then they decide that they want to make Isabella, the younger sister, they want to make her queen. Now, she was supposed to be married at one point in time in the year 1184. However, that marriage was kind of interrupted by Saladin. Eventually, when Baldwin was alive, this is before Baldwin had died, Baldwin showed up with an army and kind of got Saladin to then pull back. However, after Baldwin IV's death, she's forced to get divorced from her husband that she was married to in 1190, and she's forced to marry a different person named Conrad of Montferrat. So there's a big debate about who's supposed to be king. Is it supposed to be Conrad or is it supposed to be Guy? Now remember that for bloodline purposes, the bloodline will follow either Isabella or Sibylla. Okay, so even if Conrad's married to Isabella, it doesn't matter. His bloodline doesn't matter for the kingdom of Jerusalem. It's only Isabella's bloodline that matters. Okay, so even if Conrad got himself to be king, he would only be king consort, which means he's married to the queen, and it follows the queen's bloodline. All right, so it wouldn't follow his bloodline. All right. So what ends up happening next is that there is a city over here called Tiberias. And Saladin decides that he wants to attack this city. So Saladin takes his army, takes over a city called Tiberias over in this area from the Kingdom of Jerusalem. When Saladin takes over that city, the Kingdom of Jerusalem decides, you know what? We could sit here behind our city walls and such, but that's not the Crusader way. We're going to march across the desert and go fight Saladin at Tiberias. So they gather up their forces here in Jerusalem, and they start marching across the desert to go fight Saladin at Tiberias. Saladin meets them in battle at a place called Hattin. Like I said, a place called Hattin is where they meet up at. And the battle does not go well for Crusaders. They kind of get surrounded, they get forced up on a hill, and eventually they're forced to surrender to Saladin. And then both Conrad of Montferrat and Guy of Louisiane are both captured by Saladin, and he throws them both in jail. Once Saladin defeats the Crusader force at Hattin, he then comes down, takes over Jerusalem, takes back Gaza, Ascalon, Jaffa, Asur, Syria, Haifa, and then eventually he gets kind of stuck at Acre. Okay, we're going to make a number 1. And after making number 1, we're going to write down captured Tiberias. So make a 1, write down captured Tiberias. So Tiberias is that city that Saladin takes, that the Crusaders decide they want to retake, and then they gather up their forces and march across the desert to go fight Saladin. 2, we're going to write down Battle of Hattin. I've seen it written in both ways. So 2, Battle of Hattin. Battle of Hattin. And then after you had that, make a 3, and we're going to write down Crusaders lose. I'll type that. Crusaders lose. That for number 2. So as I was saying, what ends up happening is that Saladin starts to roll back all these places that the Crusaders had taken away from the Turks during the First Crusade. So all this territory starts to get rolled back. With the takeover of Jerusalem by Saladin, there's then a big call for there to be a Third Crusade to come and rescue the Kingdom of Jerusalem from Saladin. Okay, so then there's a call for the Third Crusade. So this is kind of how the Third Crusade gets started. So as a Guy and Conrad were both captured by Saladin. Saladin treated Guy and Conrad both decently well. There's another person that Conrad, that Saladin didn't like. This guy is named Reginald. Reginald ran a fortress called Crusades, and that fortress constantly was attacking Saladin's stuff. There's the name of it. He was constantly attacking Saladin's stuff. Saladin was kind of ticked off about Reginald about that. So when Reginald gets captured at the Battle of Hattin, he's not giving any food or water by Saladin, and then Saladin cuts off his head. So there you go. So normally they would treat people pretty well if they captured. Not so much Reginald's case because Saladin didn't like Reginald. All right. So eventually, Acre is going to fall as well. So eventually, this city here, Acre, falls, and then Saladin starts to move up to Tyre. However, by the time he gets to Tyre, he had already let Conrad and Guy out of prison. He's like, all right, Guy and Conrad, as long as you guys both promise me that you're not going to fight against me anymore, I'm going to let you guys both out of prison. And they both promised to do so. However, as soon as Conrad and Guy got out of prison, they immediately gathered up new armies and then went to Tyre to fight against Saladin. So Saladin took over the city of Tyre, and then you had both Conrad and Guy down there as well trying to retake over Tyre from Saladin. Okay, so that's kind of where they're currently at. So they're kind of both down there at Tyre trying to take over the city from Saladin. Let's go ahead and stop there for today.